On the morning of September 9th, 1942, something happened that would remain singular in American history. An enemy aircraft crossed the coastline of the continental United States, not Hawaii, not a distant island chain, not a battlefield, the mainland. For the first time, bombs fell on American soil from the air, not on soldiers, not on fortifications, but on land civilians believed was untouchable. The attack did not come from a bomber squadron. It did not come from an aircraft carrier. It came from something far more improbable. A submarine, 33 miles off the coast of Oregon. A Japanese submarine surfaced in the darkness before dawn. From its deck, the crew launched a tiny reconnaissance floatplane, an aircraft barely larger than a car, catapulted into the sky from a steel rail. Its payload was simple: incendiary bombs. Its target was stranger still. The pilot was a 31-year-old naval officer named Nobuo Fujita, and what makes this story extraordinary is not only that he bombed mainland America, it's that he survived the war, returned decades later, stood face to face with the people he once tried to harm, and spent more than half a century attempting to undo a single mission carried out in less than an hour. This is a story about warfare and conscience, about duty and unintended consequence, about a man who carried a centuries-old samurai sword into battle, and later used it to make peace. Nobuo Fujita was born in 1911 in central Japan. There was nothing remarkable about the place, nothing exceptional about the circumstances. His family were farmers, poor, hard-working, bound to the land by necessity rather than choice. Like countless others, they lived by the seasons. They saved when they could. They endured when they had to. But even as a child, Fujita's attention was drawn away from the soil beneath his feet. He looked up. He watched birds move effortlessly through the sky. He followed their paths, their turns, their freedom. Flying, to him, wasn't fantasy. It was inevitability. In 1931, at the age of 20, Fujita was conscripted into the Imperial Japanese Navy. There was no debate, no refusal. It was obligation, but where others saw conscription as interruption, Fujita saw it as an opening. Within a year, he was accepted into the Kasumigaura Naval Air School, one of Japan's most demanding aviation programs. He learned to fly seaplanes, aircraft that demanded precision and restraint. He learned navigation without modern instruments. He learned discipline. And something else became clear. He wasn't merely competent, he was gifted. By the late 1930s, Fujita was flying reconnaissance missions across Asia. These were not heroic dogfights. There were no victories to celebrate. Reconnaissance pilots flew low and slow. They were exposed, vulnerable. In 1937, Fujita flew missions along China's Yangtze River, observing enemy positions, relaying intelligence, flying routes where a single interceptor could end everything. But again and again, he returned, not because of luck, because of judgment. By the early 1940s, Fujita had earned a reputation not just as a skilled pilot, but as a reliable one. When the Navy formed a specialized unit for submarine-launched aircraft, Fujita was an obvious choice. The concept was radical: long-range submarines equipped with compact seaplanes, folded stored inside pressurized hangars built directly into the hull. When the submarine surfaced, the crew could assemble the aircraft in minutes, launch it via catapult, and send it hundreds of miles beyond enemy lines. The plane was known to Allied intelligence as the Glen. Its purpose was intelligence, not combat. But its reach was unprecedented, and Fujita became one of its finest pilots. In 1942, he was assigned to Submarine I-25, a long-range cruiser submarine tasked with operations far beyond Japan's traditional reach, before Oregon, before America. There were other missions. In early 1942, Fujita flew over Sydney Harbor under cover of darkness. He photographed airfields, counted ships, recorded defenses. He did the same over Melbourne, over New Zealand. Each time, the pattern was the same: launch, fly unseen, return. No one noticed. No one fired. The submarine vanished back into the Pacific. This was Fujita's world. Controlled danger, calculated risk, duty without spectacle, until April 1942, until something shattered the illusion of distance. For both sides, on April 18, 1942, the war crossed a line the Japanese Empire believed was immovable. American bombers struck Tokyo. They came not in waves, not in squadrons, but as a statement. 16 B-25 Mitchell bombers, launched from an aircraft carrier hundreds of miles away, flew across the Pacific and dropped their payloads on Japan's most important cities. Tokyo, Yokohama, Nagoya. The physical damage was limited. Buildings burned. Factories were hit. Civilian casualties were relatively small. But the psychological damage was total. Japan had believed its homeland was beyond reach, that the Pacific was a barrier, that American aircraft could not cross it. They were wrong. One of the bombs fell near Yokosuka, close enough to the naval facilities to be felt throughout the port. Submarine I-25 was there, and aboard it was Nobuo Fujita. He saw the explosions. He felt them. For the first time, the war was not something happening elsewhere. It was here, immediate, personal. In that moment, Fujita understood vulnerability, not as an abstraction, but as sensation, the ground shaking, the air ruptured, the certainty gone. And with it came a single consuming thought. If America could strike Japan, Japan would strike back. Revenge wasn't rage, it was symmetry, it was restoration of balance. By mid-July 1942, Fujita was summoned to naval headquarters in Tokyo. No explanation, no context, just orders. As he walked into the inner office, Fujita's thoughts raced. Court-martial, reassignment, failure. Instead, he found himself standing before Prince Takamatsu, the younger brother of Emperor Hirohito, one of the highest-ranking figures in the Imperial Japanese Navy. The room was silent, the implication immediate. An officer spoke plainly. You will carry out a bombing mission against the American mainland. Fujita didn't respond at first. His mind leapt ahead. Seattle, San Francisco, Los Angeles. He knew those cities, their size, their defenses. To attack them in a small floatplane would be suicide. After Pearl Harbor, the American coast was alert, armed, watching. But then the target was revealed: Oregon, a remote stretch of coastline near a town called Brookings. Brookings was small, isolated, its coast unsuitable for major naval bases. But inland, the forests stretched endlessly. Millions of acres of timber. Timber that fed shipyards, factories, the machinery of war. The plan was simple in theory. Drop incendiary bombs, start fires, force the Americans to respond, divert manpower, drain resources, shake morale. It was not a military strike, it was psychological warfare. And the most audacious part? The idea had come from Fujita himself. Now it had been approved, and he had been chosen to fly it. Not because he was reckless, but because he was precise. The submarine I-25 left Japan in late August of 1942. Its destination lay thousands of miles east, across an ocean that swallowed ships whole and offered no forgiveness for mistakes. This was not a normal patrol. Every mile mattered. Every hour mattered. The submarine carried fuel, torpedoes, and something no other vessel in the Japanese Navy possessed at that moment: a plane. To reach the American coast undetected, the I-25 followed a careful rhythm. At night, it ran on the surface. Engines pushed hard, black hull cutting through darkness to conserve fuel. By day, it submerged, silent, blind, listening. Inside the submarine, time lost meaning. Days blurred together. The crew spoke little. They knew what they were carrying. They knew where they were going. And they knew that no Japanese pilot had ever attempted what Fujita was about to do. Fujita spent much of the voyage reviewing charts, wind patterns, landmarks, altitude calculations. The Glen was slow, fragile, unarmed. There would be no second chances. If American fighters appeared, he would die. If he misjudged fuel, he would ditch. If the submarine failed to surface at the rendezvous point, he would be lost to the ocean. In the early hours of September 9th, the I-25 reached its position, 33 miles west of the Oregon coast. Still dark, still silent. The submarine surfaced. Cold air rushed across the deck. Immediately, the crew went to work. The Glen emerged from its watertight hangar piece by piece. Wings unfolded, control cables attached, fuel lines connected. 2 incendiary bombs, each weighing 170 pounds, were mounted beneath the wings. Fujita climbed into the cockpit. Beside him sat Petty Officer Shoji Okuda, observer, navigator, and bomb handler. Between Fujita's knees, secured carefully, was his family's samurai sword, centuries old, passed down through generations, entrusted to him by his father before the war. It was not superstition, it was responsibility. Not 2-2. Catapult's crew readying launch. At 5:35 a.m. the launch officer gave the signal. The catapult fired. The Glen leapt forward, skimmed the waves, then climbed into the darkening sky. Below, the submarine vanished back into the sea. As dawn approached, the American coastline emerged. Forests first, mountains behind them. No radar tracked him, no guns fired. The Glen cruised at 90 miles per hour, slow enough to feel every gust of wind. Fujita followed his charts precisely. He needed to fly inland, deep enough to start fires that couldn't be contained easily. At 6 a.m., he reached the target area near Brookings. The trees were thick, old growth. Perfect. Okuda armed the first bomb. Released. Below, fire blossomed, not violently, but insistently. Burning fragments scattered through the canopy. A second pass, another release, another ignition. From the cockpit, it looked successful, controlled, clean. Fujita turned back toward the coast. Satisfied. What he couldn't see was the forest floor. Damp from overnight rain. Leaves heavy with moisture. The fires struggled, smothered. But Fujita didn't know that. What came next mattered more. As the Glen approached the coastline, Fujita made his most dangerous decision. He shut off the engine. The aircraft became a glider. No noise, no vibration. Only wind across wings. The plane descended slowly, altitude bleeding away with each mile. This was deliberate. Sound meant detection. Detection meant death. The altimeter unwound. 800 feet, 600, 400. Below, trees gave way to rock. Then water. At just over 1,000 feet above the ocean, Fujita restarted the engine. The Glen climbed. 20 minutes later, the floats touched the sea. The submarine surfaced. The crew recovered the aircraft. Fujita climbed out. The mission, as far as he knew, was a success. Back in Oregon, the truth was different. A forest lookout had seen the plane. Fire crews responded. The flames were contained. One bomb never even detonated. Tokyo would call it a triumph. History would call it something else. The Glen was returned to its steel cradle. The hangar doors sealed, and the submarine I-25 slipped back beneath the surface. Fujita did not celebrate. There was no cheering, no relief, only calculation. He replayed the flight in his mind, the wind, the altitude, the dampness of the forest. He suspected something. He just didn't know how much. Reports trickled in through coded transmissions. The Americans had acknowledged an unidentified aircraft over Oregon. They had not panicked. They had not overreacted. That, more than anything, unsettled Fujita. Psychological warfare only works if the other side feels it. And America hadn't. Command approved a second mission. This time, at night. Not to start fires, but to be seen. On September 29, 1942, the I-25 again surfaced off the Oregon coast. The sea was calmer, the air colder. Stars reflected on the water like scattered fragments. The Glen was assembled again, slower this time, deliberate, every movement careful. 2 more incendiary bombs were loaded. Fujita climbed into the cockpit. Okuda took his place. The catapult fired. The aircraft lifted, black against a black sky. This mission was different. There would be no concealment, no engine cut off. The goal was not damage, it was awareness. Fujita flew lower, closer to shore. The coastline of Oregon stretched beneath him. Dark, quiet, unguarded. No searchlights, no tracer fire, no fighters. For the first time since Pearl Harbor, a Japanese aircraft flew openly over the American mainland. Unchallenged, unopposed. Fujita released the bombs inland. They ignited small fires, again quickly contained. But that was irrelevant. The message had been delivered. On the return flight, Fujita made no effort to hide. The engine droned steadily. He wanted to be heard. He wanted the Americans to look up and realize this war could reach them. Still, no one fired. No one pursued. The Glen splashed down beside the submarine and was recovered. The I-25 vanished into the Pacific. Fujita expected praise, commendation, recognition. Instead, he received silence. The fires had failed. The damage was negligible. Japan was losing the war in places that mattered far more. Guadalcanal, Midway, the Solomons. This mission became a footnote, a curiosity. And for Fujita, something else entirely. He had crossed an ocean, flown over an enemy nation, dropped bombs on its soil, and felt nothing like victory. Only distance. Years later, he would describe it simply, "I did my duty." Nothing more, nothing less. The mission against Oregon vanished almost as soon as it happened. There were no headlines in Japan, no songs written, no medals penned. The empire was bleeding elsewhere. Carrier decks lay empty. Experienced pilots were dead. Fuel was scarce, and victories once expected had become rare. Submarine I-25 continued its patrol. It attacked merchant shipping. It gathered intelligence. And then, quietly, it disappeared, sunk in 1943. No survivors. The men who had launched Fujita's aircraft into history never returned. Fujita survived because he was not there, because he had been reassigned, because chance intervened. Survival in war is rarely earned. It is allocated. By 1945, Japan was collapsing. Cities burned, not forests but neighborhoods. Firestorms swept Tokyo. Osaka vanished beneath ash. The same incendiary logic Fujita had once carried now returned in overwhelming force. The irony was unavoidable. What had failed in Oregon succeeded catastrophically in Japan, from the air, at night, with no escape. Fujita watched his country surrender, listened as the emperor spoke words no Japanese had ever heard before. The war was over, and for the first time, Fujita had to sit with what he had done and what he had not done. He returned home. He opened a hardware store. He lived quietly, but the mission stayed with him, because it had no conclusion, no reckoning, no answer. Then, in 1962, a letter arrived. From the United States, from the town of Brookings, Oregon. They were inviting him to visit. As a gesture of reconciliation, Fujita read the letter twice, then a third time. He was afraid, not of arrest, of judgment. He believed the Americans might execute him for war crimes, so he prepared. He packed his sword, the same sword he had carried over Oregon. If he was to die, he would do so with honor. Instead, when he arrived, he was welcomed. Children shook his hand. The mayor greeted him. There was no anger, only curiosity. And something else. Forgiveness. Fujita wept. Publicly. Unashamed. He donated his sword to the town, a symbol no longer of war, but of closure. Brookings was not what Fujita expected. There were no guards, no interrogations, no cold stares. Just a small town by the sea, the same sea he had crossed as an enemy. Now he crossed it again as a guest. He stood where his bombs had fallen, forest still standing, children playing nearby. Nothing burned, nothing scarred. The absence of destruction unsettled him more than ruins would have, because it meant something else had survived. He spoke to locals, loggers, teachers, students. They asked him questions, not accusatory but earnest. Why here? What did it feel like? Did he think about them? Fujita answered honestly. He told them he had followed orders. He told them he had believed in duty. And then, quietly, he told them he was sorry. No ceremony, no performance, just a man speaking the truth, long after it mattered tactically. Over time, Brookings and Fujita became linked. He returned again and again. He planted trees where fires had once tried to start. He spoke in schools. He told children about war, not as glory, but as loss. The man who once carried fire now carried growth. It was not redemption. Redemption implies erasure. This was something harder. Responsibility. In Japan, Fujita told the story too, not as a victory, but as a warning. That distance makes violence easy. That once you see the faces beneath the target, the math changes. He lived long enough to see the world change. Former enemies trading freely, borders softening, children growing up without sirens. And yet, the lesson stayed fragile, always one decision away from reversal. When Fujita died in 1997, Brookings flew its flags at half-staff, an American town mourning a former enemy, not because they forgot what he did, but because they understood what he became. History remembers wars through numbers, battles won, cities destroyed, casualties counted. But sometimes, history leaves behind something stranger, a story where almost nothing happened, and because of that, everything did. Nobuo Fujita remains the only foreign pilot to ever bomb the continental United States during World War II. That fact alone sounds dramatic, but the truth beneath it is subdued. No cities burned, no civilians died, no forests were lost. The bombs fell, and the land absorbed them. In Brookings, there is no monument to destruction, no crater preserved behind glass. Instead, there is a library exhibit, a sword, photographs of a Japanese man standing beside American children, artifacts of a war that ended, not with victory, but with understanding. The sword Fujita donated sits quietly, its edge dull with age, once carried as a symbol of honor in combat, now held as a reminder of restraint. It does not celebrate what happened. It asks why it didn't. For decades, the story circulated as a curiosity, a footnote, a trivia question, but that misses the point. This was not a story about attack. It was a story about limits, about how, even in total war, some actions fail, and sometimes failure prevents something worse. Fujita never asked to be forgiven. He never asked to be remembered. He accepted responsibility without demanding absolution. That is rare and uncomfortable, because it doesn't fit clean narratives. In his final years, when asked about the mission, he would pause before answering. Then he would say, "I flew over America once. Not I bombed it, not I attacked it, just I flew over it." That distinction matters, because flying over something lets you see it, not as a target, but as a place where people live, where children grow up, where forests recover. Wars end on paper, but reconciliation happens in moments like this. A former enemy planting a tree, a town choosing to invite, not condemn. A story remembered not for what it destroyed, but for what it didn't. In the end, the most powerful thing Fujita carried across the ocean was not a bomb. It was the chance to return and choose differently.